The intelligence report called her a ceremonial afterthought, just a bodyguard with no exoskeleton, no claws, nothing but soft flesh. The alien captain sneered at the quiet woman in the simple tunic, certain she was no threat. He ordered the human ambassador executed for espionage. She stepped between them, took a single measured breath, and drove her alloy-laced fist straight through the Starship hull. In that instant, the vacuum screamed, the guards were ripped into space, and the galaxy learned that human bodyguards aren't decoration. They're the deadliest weapon you never see coming. She was Sergeant Kaylin Vance, a void-rated structural engineer with combat prosthetics hidden beneath synthetic skin. Assigned as a decorative bodyguard, she was dismissed by alien intelligence. But when betrayal struck, she spotted a single microfracture no one else could see, and used it to bring an armada to a standstill. The question that haunts the galaxy isn't how she did it. It's why she was the only one who saw it coming. 2 hours earlier, the diplomatic shuttle Ascendancy drifted in high orbit above the neutral moon of Tarsis 7. Inside its polished command bay, the air was thick with unspoken hostility. The Zandari hegemony, a species of towering insectoid warriors with obsidian exoskeletons, had demanded this peace summit after 3 decades of border skirmishes. The human delegation had arrived with cautious hope: Ambassador Linus Marchetti, a seasoned negotiator and a single bodyguard. Sergeant Kaylin Vance stood 3 paces behind the ambassador, clad in a simple charcoal tunic, her posture relaxed, her eyes scanning every bulkhead and conduit. The Zandari captain, Vorath, a 7-foot centipede of chitin and arrogance, barely glanced at her. To him, she was a ceremonial afterthought, soft flesh, no exoskeleton, no claws, no threat. But Kaylin saw what no one else did. 20 minutes before the summit began, while the honor guard escorted them through the port access corridor, she'd noticed a hairline fracture in the main hull plating. It was so fine that the structural scanners would have dismissed it as sensor noise. But Kaylin was a void-rated structural engineer, a woman who had spent years crawling through the guts of deep space freighters and military cruisers, learning every failure point a pressurized hull could hide. That microfracture aligned exactly with a known stress node from an old manufacturing flaw, a flaw that had been quietly buried in classified Terran shipyard reports. She filed the knowledge away without a word. The summit room was a cathedral of transparent alloy overlooking the swirling gas giant below. Captain Vorath sat opposite Marchetti, his compound eyes glittering with something far colder than diplomatic curiosity. They exchanged pleasantries for exactly 4 minutes before Vorath's mandibles twitched and he activated a holographic display, a fabricated intelligence file. Ambassador Marchetti, you've been transmitting classified fleet movements to Terran command from within our sovereign territory. This summit was a pretense for your espionage. You will be executed immediately. The Zandari guards moved to seize Marchetti. Kaylin stepped between them. The captain laughed, a rasping chitter that echoed off the crystal walls. What can you do, human? You are unarmored, unarmed. You are just a bodyguard. Kaylin didn't answer. Her eyes flicked to the microfracture, now positioned perfectly at shoulder height 2 meters to her left. She had spent a lifetime being underestimated because she didn't wear her strength on the outside. The reinforced combat prosthetics woven into her skeletal structure hummed silently beneath synthetic skin, waiting. She had not planned for this moment, but she had prepared for it since the day she rebuilt her own body from the ashes of a catastrophic decompression accident. And now, with the lives of everyone in the bay hanging on a single stress point, she calmly stepped between them and took a single measured breath. The punch was not a wild swing. It was a calculated demolition strike, delivered with the precision of a woman who had spent a decade memorizing every stress threshold of reinforced durasteel. Kaylin's fist connected with the hull exactly at the microfracture's apex, and her combat prosthetics, titanium alloy laced through her metacarpals, powered by microhydraulic pistons, punched through the outer plating like a railgun slug through paper. The Starship screamed. Not a sound, but a violent shudder that tore through the deck as the pressurized atmosphere found a sudden, violent exit. The air turned to a hurricane, screams swallowed whole, and the towering Zendari guards were ripped off their four clawed feet and yanked through the widening gash into the silent void. Captain Voreth had a split second of incomprehension, a flicker of disbelief in his compound eyes, before the vacuum claimed him too, his armored bulk spinning into the darkness alongside his shattered arrogance. Kaylen's boots clamped onto the deck with a magnetic whine. Her left arm shot sideways and locked around Ambassador Marchetti's chest just as the decompression wave tried to pull him free. The gale roared past them for 3 seconds, an eternity in the chaos, and then the pressure equalized. The bay was silent, a frozen tableau of floating debris, overturned furniture, and the distant twinkle of stars visible through the ragged hole in the hull. But Kaylen was already moving. She had 30 seconds before the emergency bulkheads auto-sealed and trapped them in a dead zone with no access to the rest of the ship. She released Marchetti gently, gesturing for him to hold the anchor point, and launched herself toward the navigation console 5 meters away. Every second counted. Her fingers flew across the touchscreen, bypassing the locked security interface with a backdoor override code she had embedded in the diplomatic shuttle's systems 3 days prior, a precaution the intelligence division had considered paranoid. She didn't wait for the Zandari ship's AI to respond. She pulled up the internal communications array, routed the primary fleet broadcast frequency, and let the audio and visual feeds from the summit room play. There, frozen in a moment of perfect treachery, was Captain Voreth, his mandibles clicking as he declared the execution of an unarmed ambassador on fabricated charges. The transmission blanketed the entire Zendari armada, 23 warships orbiting Tarsis 7, as well as the hidden human surveillance net spread across the neutral zone. Within 90 seconds, the Zendari fleet's second-in-command, a scarred veteran named General Zareth, issued a fleet-wide order. Voreth's personal guard was detained on every vessel, and the Ascendancy itself was boarded by Zareth's loyal shock troops. The Armada, moments from launching an invasion under cover of the diplomatic incident, stood down. Not a single shot was fired. The hegemony's Grand Council, watching from the homeworld, immediately disavowed Voreth and declared the peace summit a trap orchestrated by a rogue faction. The war that had seemed inevitable was, for now, averted by a woman who had simply noticed a crack in the wall. But here's the thing. The galaxy celebrated Kaylen Vance as a hero, the bodyguard who punched through a Starship hull. They called her a weapon, a marvel of human augmentation. They missed the point entirely. Kaylen was not a weapon first. She was a void-rated structural engineer, a woman who had spent her youth crawling through the skeletons of interstellar freighters, identifying hairline cracks that could turn a life support system into a tomb. Her prosthetics were not military issue. They were medical reconstructions, built in a civilian hospital after a decompression accident killed her entire crew when she was 21. She rebuilt herself not to fight, but to survive. And that intimate knowledge of catastrophic failure gave her an eye that no tactical scanner could replicate. The real story, the one that would consume the next 3 decades of interspecies intelligence work, began in the quiet hours after the stand down. While the diplomats celebrated and the holofeeds replayed the punch on a loop, Kaylen sat alone in a maintenance corridor of the Ascendancy, plugged into the ship's engineering data core. She wasn't looking for medals. She was looking for the reason the microfracture existed in the first place, and what she found in the hull maintenance logs made her blood run cold. The flaw was not a manufacturing defect. It had been introduced deliberately, a surgical, precision-cut stress fracture, placed exactly where a structural engineer would spot it, but only if she was specifically trained to look for that pattern. Someone had prepared that hull to fail. Someone had known a human bodyguard with her specific skill set would be on board. The fabrication of the intelligence file, the summit, the execution order, it was all a stage. The true target was not the ambassador. It was the peace itself. And the conspiracy reached far deeper than a single Zandari captain. A shadow network, spanning both human and Zandari command structures, had orchestrated the entire event to trigger an interstellar war. And the only person who had stopped it was now the one person who could expose the architect still hiding in plain sight. Kaylin didn't announce her discovery. She knew better. In the immediate aftermath of the stand-down, the diplomatic channels flooded with congratulations. Ambassador Marchetti was whisked away to a secure debriefing, and the human media spun the story of the miraculous bodyguard. Kaylin slipped into the Ascendancy's engineering sublevels without notifying anyone. She downloaded the hull maintenance logs onto a hardened data chip, sealed it in a radiation-proof pouch, and tucked it against her synthetic ribs. If she was right, the people who had staged this would already be scrubbing their tracks. She had maybe hours before the evidence vanished. She was right, but not in the way she expected. 12 standard hours later, General Zareth, the very commander who had ordered Vorath's detention and stood down the fleet, invited Kaylin to a private commendation ceremony aboard his flagship, the Reclaimer. The invitation was delivered by two heavily armed Zendari honor guards and presented as non-negotiable. Ambassador Marchetti advised caution. Something in the general's sudden warmth felt off. Kaylin accepted. She needed to see Zareth's reaction to the truth. The Reclaimer was a fortress of blackened armor and cold, efficient brutality. In the general's private war room, surrounded by star charts and tactical holograms, Zareth offered her fermented nectar and a ceremonial blade of gratitude. Kaylin refused both. She placed the data chip on the obsidian table and told him what she'd found. The microfracture was not a flaw. It was a message, a signature left by someone who knew a Void-rated engineer would be on that shuttle, who wanted the hull to break in that exact way, under that exact pressure, at that exact moment. The entire incident was a false flag designed to fail, to expose Vorath, and to discredit a specific faction within the hegemony. Zareth's mandibles clicked softly, a gesture of surprise or amusement, she couldn't tell. Then he did something she hadn't anticipated. He laughed. Not a dismissive laugh, but one of genuine, unsettling delight. "You are exactly what they feared," he said. "A human who cannot be fooled by armor or rank. The crack was placed by my operatives." The admission landed like a physical blow. Zareth was not the hero who stopped the war. He was the architect of the incident. He had known Vorath was a loose cannon, a warmonger whose own subordinates despised him. By manufacturing a diplomatic catastrophe that would inevitably fail, thanks to Kaylin's presence, Zareth had eliminated his rival, solidified his own position, and most importantly, triggered a wave of gratitude from humanity that would allow him to push through a series of secret trade agreements giving the hegemony access to unregulated human border systems. But that wasn't the worst part. Zareth leaned forward, his compound eyes glittering. "The human who identified your engineering background for the mission. He sits on your own intelligence council. His name is Director Aldrich Voss." Kaylin's blood turned to ice. Voss was a legend in Terran intelligence, the architect of a dozen quiet victories against Zandari espionage. He had personally briefed her before the mission, praising her specialized skill set as the perfect deterrent. He had selected her not as a bodyguard but as a detonator, a tool to ensure the incident unfolded exactly as Zareth needed. And now, with the Armada standing down and Zareth's faction in ascendancy, Voss was positioned to become the next Secretary General of the Coalition's Defense Council. Zareth smiled. "You are now a liability to both sides. Your own people will disavow you if you speak. My people will call you a conspirator and a liar. You have no allies, no proof beyond that chip, and no future." He gestured to the guards. "I could have you killed here, but that would be wasteful. Instead, I offer you a choice. Accept a position as my personal security advisor, silent, well compensated, and alive, or walk out of this room and discover how quickly a hero can become a hunted fugitive." Kaylin stood motionless for 5 full seconds. Then she did what she always did when the hull was about to breach. She identified the failure point. Zareth had made a mistake. He had told her the name. He had admitted involvement. He had assumed she was isolated and helpless. But Kaylin had not come alone. She had worn her earrings, a pair of delicate silver studs that contained micro-recorders linked to a dead-drop relay she'd planted on the Ascendancy before ever setting foot on the Reclaimer. Every word Zareth had spoken was now encrypted and transmitted to the one person in the galaxy she still trusted, Ambassador Marchetti. She turned and walked toward the door. The guards moved to block her, but Zareth raised a claw, amused. "You'll die out there, human, alone and disgraced." Kaelin glanced back. "I've been dying since I was 21. I'm still here." She stepped into the corridor, the blast doors grinding shut behind her, and the hunt began. Within the hour, an anonymous intelligence directive flagged her as a rogue operative wanted for treason. Director Voss had already moved to contain the leak. And somewhere in the dark of the neutral zone, the Shadow Network activated its contingency plan, one that would silence Kaelin Vance forever and kick off the invasion they'd been preparing for a decade. The only weapon she had left was the truth, and 36 hours to deliver it before the Coalition and the Hegemony both fell into a war no one saw coming. The corridor stretched ahead like a vein of polished obsidian. Kaelin moved fast, not running. Running drew eyes, but walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who belonged. She had memorized the Reclaimer's deck layout during the approach, scanning the public schematics on her datapad and cross-referencing them with every Xandari military vessel design she'd ever studied. There was always a maintenance junction within 60 meters of the command level. She found it beneath a false environmental panel, slid into the cramped service shaft, and sealed the access point behind her. The hunt was already on. She could hear the muffled stamp of clawed boots 2 decks above, the hiss of sealed bulkheads cycling. Zareth's forces were sweeping the ship, but they were looking for a fleeing human, not one who had already vanished into the bones of the vessel. Kaelin crawled through conduits for 17 minutes, navigating by touch and the faint hum of power relays, until she dropped into a secondary hangar bay reserved for waste disposal shuttles. The craft was automated, unmonitored, designed to jettison refuse into the nearest star. She bypassed its safety protocols in under 90 seconds, reprogrammed the navigation computer, and launched herself into the void inside a coffin-sized sanitation pod. 30 hours later, she drifted into the shadow of the Ascendancy's debris field. Marchetti's retrieval team, operating on the encrypted dead-drop coordinates, scooped her up with a cloaked medical frigate. She was dehydrated, bruised, and running on adrenaline, but the chip in her ribs was intact. More importantly, the recording of Zareth's confession was already in Marchetti's hands, having bounced through 3 relay satellites and 1 civilian news drone. The ambassador had not been idle. He'd spent the day quietly assembling a coalition of neutral observers, retired admirals, and investigative journalists. By the time Kaelin was aboard, the proof was already leaking onto the galactic net. Director Aldrich Voss was arrested in his private office, just as he was finalizing the emergency decree that would have made him acting Secretary General. The video of Zareth's gloating confession played on every monitor in Coalition headquarters. Voss didn't resist. He simply stared at the recording, his face a mask of cold calculation, then uttered 3 words. "This changes nothing." He was wrong. Within the hour, the Xandari Grand Council, facing a catastrophic internal revolt, revoked Zareth's command and issued a full audit of all Hegemony military contracts. The Shadow Network, designed to survive the fall of any single piece, crumbled when both sides simultaneously exposed it. 42 human officials and 31 Xandari officers were indicted for conspiracy. The war that had loomed over the galaxy for a decade evaporated in the space of a single broadcast. But the real surprise came later. 3 days after the crisis ended, Kaelin sat in a quiet rehabilitation ward on Earth, her prosthetics being recalibrated. A message arrived on a frequency so classified it didn't appear on any spectrum analyzer. It was a simple text block. "You were never supposed to be the detonator. You were always meant to be the proof. The bodyguards who see the cracks are the only ones who can expose the architects. We'll be in touch." There was no signature, only a single symbol, a stylized human eye bisected by a faint hairline fracture. Kaylin deleted the message, then stared at the blank screen for a long moment. She understood now. She hadn't just been chosen for her expertise. She had been cultivated for it, her entire career subtly guided toward this moment. The Shadow Network wasn't just an enemy. It was a disease that had infected both governments for generations. And someone, somewhere, had been waiting for a bodyguard to punch through the hull and bring the house of cards down. She stood up, flexing the newly calibrated alloy fingers of her right hand. The galaxy had learned that human bodyguards weren't decorative. But the galaxy still didn't know the most dangerous truth of all. There were more cracks waiting to be found. Kaylin Vance was just getting started. The story of Kaylin Vance spread across the galaxy not because she punched through a Starship hull, but because she saw what everyone else missed. The Zandari Armada, the intelligence councils, the politicians and generals, all of them were staring at armor and rank, at titles and traditions. None of them looked at the wall. Kaylin did. That is the quiet, terrifying power of a human who understands how things break. We live in a universe of hidden stress fractures. In our institutions, our relationships, our very bodies. Most people walk past them every day without a glance. Kaylin Vance was not born a hero. She was forged in the aftermath of tragedy, rebuilt with alloy and memory, and taught by loss to see the cracks that others ignored. Her greatest weapon was never the titanium in her fist. It was the engineer's eye that found the one flaw capable of bringing an empire to its knees. The Shadow Network may be weakened, but the final mystery remains. Who sent her that message? Who was guiding her path across decades, placing fault lines in her way, waiting for the bodyguard to become the proof? Somewhere, a quiet observer with a fractured eye is still watching, which means Kaylin's story is far from over. If you believe that the overlooked and underestimated hold the power to change everything, then share this story. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales of human defiance against impossible odds. The galaxy is full of cracks. Someone has to find them. See you in the next one.